Hey, Storm Freaks, it's Phil. Welcome to the most entertaining weather podcast. This is the award-winning Stormfront Freaks podcast, and tonight's bonus episode, it's brought to you by Windstorm Products. Got to check out their selection, their quantities, their pricing. It's not going to be found anywhere else. Combined with their $5 flat rate shipping, makes them the best choice for helping to protect and improve your home or your business. A special shout out tonight to all of us that happen to be joining live and checking us out on YouTube. Also want to say thank you to our Patreon members that we have got scrolling on the bottom of the screen. While we're going through our interview tonight, feel free to comment in the chat section. Give us your thoughts on the show and your feedback. Tonight, we're going to be live with Hurricane Chaser Josh Morgerman. He's also the star of the new series premiering Sunday. It's titled Mission Hurricane. So Josh has been chasing now for over 30 years. Welcome back to the show, Josh. How you doing?
Good. Real awesome to be back. This is one of my favorite places to appear because I could be the total weirdo that I am. I don't have to control myself.
That's true. You're always in good company. You're always in good company with us. So, hey, one thing I want to do, Josh, before we get started, I'm actually going to, I want to share and play the trailer for your show.
Chase hurricanes. And in my new series, Mission Hurricane, I'll share my personal experiences from the eye of the storm.
I'm on the beachfront of Mazute. The water's really coming up now. Hurricane Agatha's moving in. It's ripping hard now.
I've been stranded, roughed up, and presumed dead. Follow me as I take you into the world's mightiest hurricanes.
Get in here, come on. Much stronger hurricane than I was expecting.
Prepare to get blown away.
Mission Hurricane, Sunday starting April 9th on Weather Spy.
So that series pretty intense.
Yeah.
Very intense.
Yeah, they wanted that kind of style. They wanted it kind of like action movie and stuff. And I just do as I'm told. The director said, give like an intense delivery of these lines and, let's make it like a really, in your face kind of promo. So that's what they came up with. I'm happy with it. I think it conveys like sort of the vibe and the mood of the show.
Yeah, no, it's real cool. I love it. So tell us a little bit here about what the show's all about and what we can expect.
Yeah, so I've been chasing all these years, and I've just had all of these unbelievable, like just cataclysmic adventures around the world. Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas, Hurricane Patricia in Mexico, all these just these crazy experiences. I've had a bunch of near-death, close calls. I've rescued people. There's all these just crazy adventures I've had. And also I've traveled all over the world. So Juke and Media was like, we should make this. We should take all of your sort of your vast, all these experiences, and we should make this into TV. So basically, it's almost like a retrospective of my work, which is really cool. So each episode, there's 12 half-hour episodes, and each episode most of them focus on a single hurricane, a single expedition. And it goes deeper than a lot of other shows because it's not just about the impact, but also the whole experience of getting there, my motivations, what are the obstacles along the way. And then, of course, it builds to the climax of the actual impact. And then sort of the kind of experience afterward, the come down from that. So it gets pretty in depth. It's pretty cool. It makes each expedition into its own sort of, like a story and an experience.
What years is this covering in your chase career?
Went as far back as we could with the available footage. So my style of shooting over the years has changed. So when I first started chasing hurricanes, well, this is going to sound totally bananas to everyone listening because I know a lot of storm chasers watch this show. But when I first started storm chasing, again, like I hope you're sitting, I did not bring a camera. It wasn't important to me to document it or to take pictures. There was no such thing as social media. This was a while ago. And I just wanted to experience it, be in the moment, feel it. And I only started shooting in 2005. And then when I started shooting, I was such a hurricane nerd that I didn't think to tell a story or do pieces to camera or anything like that. All I cared about was the hurricane. So my early chases, there was no footage of me, no footage of getting there, no narration really. It was just shooting the hurricane and that's it. Now, for me, as a total hurricane nerd, I'm like, oh, that's good. I could just watch that kind of footage for 2 hours. For normal TV viewers, they need something more. They need like a story. They need to know your feelings, what you're going through, what you're thinking. So with my early chases, in the early 2000s, those were harder to make TV out of. So to answer your question, to finally get to it, the series focuses more on my work from the last decade, when I started doing a little more sort of, just pieces to camera and kind of creating the assets that are needed to make a full TV show.
So I was going to ask this question later in the show, but you've already brought it up, because I'm curious, and I sort of know the answer because we've spoken before, but so here's a series you're doing that's covering the last decade of your chases, and it's a television video series. What do you take with you to film all this stuff? What's in your bag of equipment that you're bringing with you to get this footage?
So I have to state that the number one thing for me is portability. That is everything, because most of my chasing, I do it with a passport, meaning there's only about a third of my chasing is inside the United States. I mean, of course, the pandemic changed things a little bit, but now we're back to normal. So basically 2/3 of my time is spent, flying around, connecting flights to random islands and random places. So portability is everything. And also durability is another thing, making sure I've got equipment that's not going to die. So in terms of like camera equipment, and again, I hope you're sitting, I do most of my shooting now on smartphones. I always have like a couple on hand. I have a high end, like the latest Samsung Galaxy and the very latest iPhone. And I bring those, and that's where I do most of my shooting, because the items are small, portable, they do high quality footage, and they're incredibly resistant, when I'm like to just terrible conditions. You're just out in the rain and the wind, and those things just stay up. Every time over the years, no matter what camcorder I've used, I've had issues. They've died, they've fogged up, all these things happen. It's very hard to shoot in a hurricane. I get the best results with smartphones. And in fact, when I started doing that, it was in 2017. I was chasing Hurricane Harvey. I shot half on a really good camcorder and half on my high-end smartphone. And then when I was in the editing room, I actually kept picking the smartphone shots. They just looked a little more sort of color saturated and everything, and I liked the way they looked. And I was like, you know what? And they're even more portable. So most of my shooting is actually done on these devices, shocking as it might seem.
So have you thought about changing that or adding to that, just because now that you're doing some of these TV series, and I know you've done previous ones as well, but have you thought about changing that, adding something else that might still be portable, whether it's a GoPro camera or something similar?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you asked. I shouldn't misrepresent it. I do take a couple of GoPros with me, and I try, and I will often, some of my videos, I use a lot of GoPros, especially if I'm just getting really like, if I'm like right on the sort of waterfront getting hit by waves and stuff, then I'll use a GoPro. Some of my footage, like my Typhoon Kamori video, which I shot in the Philippines, that was a nighttime Category 4. Most of that was actually shot on a GoPro. So I do mix it up a little more than I'm letting on. I would say the biggest change to how I'm shooting is that the producers of Mission Hurricane are, because I'm creating more content for hopefully season 2 episodes. And the thing they tell me is they're like, shoot everything. Even if you think it's boring, shoot, your experience going through the airport, do pieces to camera when you're in a really bad mood and you don't want to do pieces to camera because the chase isn't going well. They want every moment of it to be documented. They want a lot of B-roll of the locations. So what it means is, from each chase, I come back with a lot more footage than I used to when I was just shooting the hurricane alone. So I'm shooting in a very different way now. I'm shooting, with a mind toward trying to create TV shows, not just YouTube videos for other weather nerds.
Yeah, and I would imagine chasing hurricanes, chasing typhoons, is a drone ever a possibility for you, or have you thought about that?
It's a great question. So I, like many people, I've just been blown away, no pun intended, by some of the drone footage that some of the folks out in the field have been getting recently. I mean, just I mean, it's that stuff Reed got, within the last year, that tornado going through that. I mean, it just, it's unbelievable to see it, and of course, it's great for surveying damage afterward. So one thing that's been happening to me, the way my chasing has evolved, it's gotten more and more complex. So I mentioned when I was first chasing in the 90s, when I was just like basically a kid and I didn't even have a camera. It was so simple. I remember the first chase I went on, I had a little duffel bag. It had a paper map and a pencil and some clothes and some cash. This was before mobile phones even. And that was it. There was no camera, no nothing. And it was just about being in the hurricane in the moment, not even recording it. Cut to 30 years later, I've got all these devices and I'm trying to collect really good meteorological data, and I'm trying to deploy those instruments in multiple places so I can get a full pressure profile of the hurricane. And I'm usually covering the hurricane for some TV network. So I'm doing live hits, and I'm trying to film the hurricane and I'm trying to navigate. It's all getting very complicated. And sometimes I just start to feel like, oh my God, this is too much. The experience is losing the magic. So getting to your question about drones, I've thought about it, but then I'm like, okay, this is another thing to operate, another piece of equipment. And so in sort of my desire to not just overload myself and just start to hate the experience because I'm just working nonstop during the storm and I have no moment to just sit back and just take it in. At this point, I'm not planning on adding another piece of gadgetry, although I should consider it because, man, the drone stuff I've seen is incredible.
It's good. Truthfully, I don't know how well that can be sustained in a tropical storm kind of setting.
Well, there's that too. I think that actually when you're in the sexy part of the hurricane, when you're in the eye wall, you can't fly a drone in that. So you can't do that. I think where a drone can be really magical in a hurricane is in the eye. Let's say you're in a really hot stadium eye, and to go up into the into the upper reaches of a stadium eye, I think would be spectacular. And someone's going to do that at some point, and it's going to look very cool.
Yeah. Yep. So, hey, Deborah, who's listening and watching, says sometimes you're stranded for days on a location. How do you keep all that stuff charged? And even when you're out of the States?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way to keep all that stuff charged is having a car. So your car becomes your number one source of power on a chase, especially when you're, let's say, outside the United States in a developing nation with, maybe no infrastructure. Your car is everything. And as long as the car is running, you can power everything up and keep it going. Now in Hurricane Dorian, I was really lucky because I was stuck there for days. And I rode out the hurricane in a little concrete room. It was a classroom. It was like a little bunker. I rode it out with 11 people, the walls rattling. I mean, that was some crazy ass wind. Afterward, when we went outside, all the cars were just thrown all over the parking lot. So the car that was parked next to mine had just blown away. I don't know where it went, but my car, this little tiny car, was still there without even a broken window. It was some weird stuff. So having that car really got me through all those days. I lived in that car, and that car was my source of power. That car was my source of mental stability.
Yeah, that's it's surprising that even one of that size, I guess, survived or lasted as long as it did. I want to jump back, Josh, a little bit to the series again, only because, as I mentioned earlier, obviously you've done at least one previous series I'm aware of, maybe more, but I'm curious to know what makes this one different than any others or any of your other just YouTube video.
I'm excited about Mission Hurricane because it's going to be sort of the whole collection of all of these just unbelievable chases and experiences that I've had. So when I made Hurricane Man back in 2018, and that's a really cool series, and I was very proud to made that with UK TV and the British Broadcasting Corporation. That was a British series with an American lead. That show, what that did was that one covered one season in real time. It was the 2018 season. So I had a whole crew British filmmakers basically following me all around the world, wherever I wanted to go. So, Japan, Mexico, just the United States, Philippines, it was just all over the place. And they just followed me around as I hunted down cyclones for a season in real time. Mission Hurricane is a look back. There's been time to kind of have processed these experiences and kind of, sort of pulled the wisdom out of them and to look back and sort of tell the whole story and to sort of memorialize all of these unbelievable adventures and all these near-death experiences that I've had over the years. I'm very excited about it. I feel like, when I'm no longer here, there will be Mission Hurricane, which will be like basically the full look back at like my career and all the experiences that I've had.
So I'm always curious from a production standpoint, where does a series like this, I guess, where does it get its start? Where's the pebble that kind of gets this whole boulder going?
Okay. So if you want to be a TV star and do TV, like, let me tell you, like, rule number one is like, go into it with the patience of Job. Like, it is such a slow process to get a show off the ground. I mean, I've been through this a couple of times now. From that initial discussion with a producer who's thinking of making a show to actually shooting and then getting paid, I mean, we're talking a couple of years a lot of the time. It's a very slow process. Usually it's an idea, it's bandied around. You have a lot of meetings, with the potential director and the casting director. Then the idea starts to gel. And then that company will probably make an internal sort of sizzle reel to show it to the higher up executives. And then those executives will then, based on that, decide whether they like it. And then with Mission Hurricane, they didn't want to go all in right away. At first at Juke and Media, they were like, well, let's try it out. So we shot a pilot episode, and we shot that last May, and then they broadcast that in August. It did very well. Then they approved the rest of the series, and then we shot the rest of the other 12 episodes over the fall and winter. But it was a very slow process to come up with the show concept and shape it, get it approved, and then actually shoot it. And then one last thing I want to say is post-production is a very big part of this. Once we shot it, there's a whole team. There's a lead editor and like 4 people working under him and the director. And I have to go into the studio a lot. And we sit around and have these creative meetings. We watch cuts of each episode. And then we talk about how to make it better, how to shape it. And that's one thing I like about this show. I'm the talent. I'm like, I'm the sort of host of the show. And what I've learned over the years is like, the host of the show, the star of the show, the one you see on camera is like, in terms of the power structure, is like just above the person who cleans the offices. Like, you don't have a lot of power, but they actually have given me a lot of say and influence in this show. I'm able to, give them creative inputs, and they actually will implement a lot of my feedback, which is really nice because, sometimes I'll be watching the episode and I'll be like, that's kind of a lame shot. Let's use this one. There's a little more energy in it, and they'll take my feedback. So that's really cool.
That's pretty sweet. So you mentioned a little bit about shooting. So I'm curious what additional shooting is involved above and beyond the footage that you're providing.
So the Mission Hurricane, it's a combination of the kind of like, rough on the ground, in the moment kinetic footage, and then studio footage. And in that one, we did it, in a very, there's like a sort of like a neutral kind of moody background. The lighting is really moody. They picked out my wardrobe, like what they wanted me to wear. And they kind of really got my look exactly like they wanted it and lit me exactly like they wanted it. And to create kind of like an atmosphere. And that's where, from that point of view in the studio, and you can see those are the darker, moodier shots in the episode. That's from that environment, I'm telling the story. And it has kind of a cinematic feel, and that's interspliced with the on location stuff. And it kind of goes back and forth between the two.
So we have another viewer that had a question regarding Australia, but I'm curious, have you chased anything down in Australia before?
Absolutely. I started chasing in Australia right before the pandemic. Well, back in 2017, went down there for a cyclone, had a totally epic experience that unfortunately I did not capture on camera. Long story with that one. It would have made the best episode ever. But then Then Australia had one or two slow seasons, and then there was the pandemic. So now this is a very exciting year. It's like sort of a resurrection. I feel like I could really sort of prowl the globe again this year. It's the first time in years because it looks like we're finally on the other side of all of those COVID travel restrictions.
So talking about the series, I'm always curious, is there, because we mentioned, Josh, you've got great stuff on YouTube, you've got a number of followers there. Is there going to be anything in this series that is going to surprise those followers or shock those followers, something maybe they haven't seen before?
I think that it's going to give them a much deeper look at these chases and what goes into them, the feelings behind them, all that other stuff. So I think that in that sense, it's gonna bring like entirely new layers. Like a lot of it almost feels like behind the scenes footage. So I think that it's going to give sort of a deeper look at what it is to go to the other side of the earth to chase a life-threatening cyclone.
So what question, because I know following you on Twitter, I've seen you comment on this a few times. In the chaser community, especially the what you call the little twisty things community, there's obviously been some that you're aware of, and I shouldn't say obvious because there's a lot of people watching and listening and probably aren't aware that the chasing community has had some unfortunate near misses with some of the tornadoes, and there's been a lot of discussion on that. But one of our viewers tonight, Paulo, was kind of asking if you've ever had to leave a situation because you felt that it was just too high risk.
Yeah, actually, Hurricane Dorian was that. I was initially going to ride it out in a little, like a two-story condo on a little sort of like a bayou in a resort town a little north of Marsh Harbor, which is the main town on Abaco Island. And as the hurricane started to come in and it started to really get intense, it was before it was raining or anything, I got spooked and I started to have like literal like death premonitions. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to die if I stay here. So I drove back into town. It was about 20 miles and I rode out the hurricane in Marsh Harbor. And by the way, I wasn't running from the hurricane because in that location, the location I picked, I went right through the stadium eye, which is what I wanted. But it felt just a tiny bit safer because I rode it out in a concrete school and it was on a hill. And that just seemed like a little more like, here's the deal. I lead a daredevil life. I'm a professional adventurer. I'm going all around the world to these crazy places to hunt down category 5s in like developing nations and places you've never heard of. But I also want to live. I want to live to see another day and chase other hurricanes. So for me, it's a matter of, okay, always trying to find that, like, I guess where that line is, walking along the edge of the cliff so that you're having and documenting an amazing adventure, but not, ending up in a coffin.
So you've seen there's been over the last, I would say certainly the last couple of years or since COVID, there's probably been I've seen a new influx of storm chasers into the community. I would imagine that's probably the case with hurricane chasing as well. Now, that's not something that I do currently, but I guess what have you seen in your hurricane chasing community over the last couple of years as far as things that you've seen that you like, things that you see maybe that you haven't liked?
There's definitely been a change. And like you said, there's certainly been an influx of new hurricane chasers. And I think a lot of them are actually tornado chasers who are like, oh, I guess I'll try this out. And actually that makes perfect sense. And the reason that that's happening is because the USA is having what I'm calling a golden era of hurricane impacts. So when you look at US hurricane history, over the last 170 years, when we have good data, there are decades where like it's just nothing's happening. Like when I started tracking hurricanes when I was in grade school and just really interested in the topic, it was in the early 80s and there was nothing hitting the US. I mean, it was like you'd go a couple of seasons without a landfalling hurricane. Other decades are really busy. The last 6 years have just been nuts. I mean, we've been getting all these, not just all these landfalls, but intense landfalls, category 4s and even a 5. So that's attracted, that's just made it basically these storms are just being handed to American chasers. They don't have to go abroad. They don't have to get on a plane. They don't have to have a passport. They don't even have to have money. They could just drive from their home, wherever it is, and go chase them. So that's why there's been this big influx, I think, because the goods are just right there. Now, whether this sustains once the US goes into a slow phase again, and you have to go to Mexico or Taiwan or the Philippines to hunt down big storms, whether this interest sustains and whether some of these chasers start to, really chase abroad and do it like, globally, that remains to be seen.
Do you have any thoughts on this coming season yet, as far as 2023?
My hunch is that it looks like, we're coming out of a La Nina. We're now in a neutral phase, and it looks like maybe an El Nino is going to be building by the summer or fall. So that suggests that it might slightly suppress activity in the Atlantic, which means that the U.S. could have a quieter season. But on the other hand, when you look at the SST anomalies, the sea surface temperatures around the Gulf and the Bahamas are much higher than normal. So that is a factor. So I think I'm getting mixed signals. Dr. Phil Klotzbach of the Colorado State University, he's about to release his much celebrated seasonal forecast. And I think it's going to come out in a couple of days. And I think we're all really curious about what's going to happen. But here's the deal. If there's an El Nino and that suppresses Atlantic activity, that's going to increase Pacific activity. So I'm always going to have the same number of chases a year. The variable is whether it's in the Atlantic, like let's say in the US or, places around here, or whether it's in the Pacific.
And how much it's going to cost.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Listen, man, 2020, that's when I started living in Mississippi. There was the first year I picked to live in Mississippi when everything came to the Gulf Coast. It was the most incredible experience. I've gotten so used to, living in LA, every chase I do there's always a flight involved, even if it's like Texas or, there's no such thing as a local hurricane for me back then. And, there was always just that buzzkill of going to the airport and just that hatefulness. And living now in the Gulf Coast during hurricane season, it's cool. You're just more connected to the environment. You look out over the Gulf every day and that it could deliver something. And then when there's a chase, it's getting in the car and driving to it. And you just, it's a different feeling. And it really almost like re-enlivened my enthusiasm to chase. The fact that a lot of my chases now don't have to involve airports. They just could be pure road trips, which is awesome.
So I know you're building a house there in Mississippi. How's that coming?
It's coming good. The builder sent me a picture today, and there's that big old foundation that they're filling with concrete, and it's starting to get real. Like, I'm getting excited. It took a while. I've never built a house before, so I'm kind of a virgin in this area. And I didn't realize it takes a while to get the project going, just with approvals and, various, the historical commission had to say that they're okay with it. And then the planning commission had to be okay with it and other things. But now it's really going up, and I'm actually going there tomorrow to sort of check on it and meet with the builder about just sort of talking about the additional ways that we're going to hurricane proof this house, because I'm building a house that I am ready to ride out a Category 5 in, even though it's only a block and a half from the Gulf.
Wow. So how soon do you expect it to be done?
This summer.
Really? Nice.
Yeah. It'll go up fast. It's not a huge house. I mean, well, to me, it's a big house because I've always lived in big cities. So we're, in big cities, you're used to smaller houses, smaller apartments. So by Mississippi standards, it's, I think, a small house, but to me, it is a big house. So.
Well, tell you what, I'm going to bring in a couple of our Patreon VIPs, see if they've got any questions for you. Garrett, you have any questions for Josh?
I think just based on the amount of experience, the places, countries you've seen, with the hurricane response and the cyclone response in these other countries, do you think they honestly are a little more prepped than what we are here in the States, or kind of respected a little bit more? It just, in a sense, it kind of seems like we're dropping the ball big time behind a lot of these countries, and especially with FEMA's response and things like that.
I mean, Garrett, it's a great question. I make mental notes all the time. I definitely notice differences. I think each country has its strengths. In terms of construction, in terms of making houses that'll just stay up to crazy wind, I feel that Japan and Taiwan, they like, you'll be in a category 4 typhoon in one of those countries, and you come outside afterward and the cars will be thrown all over the place like toys because their cars are smaller than ours, but the buildings, barely any damage, like maybe a broken window here and there, but it's like everything is so like, it's like these houses are like bunkers. They don't seem to have as much of that kind of some of the weaker wood frame construction that we have in parts of the United States. Although it's hard to generalize about the United States because it depends on the area. Like I remember I was in Naples, Florida for, Hurricane Irma. We had a direct hit, strong hurricane, very intense winds. It was like Japan. I came out afterward and there was a lot of tree damage, but the houses all look great. So the codes vary in the United States, but I would say like that's one area. Japan and Taiwan, I think really do really well in terms of like construction strength. In terms of the emergency response afterward, I'm less, I would say like I have a not as formed an opinion about that because to evaluate the emergency response, you got to kind of sort of stay there with the story for a long time. And me, I'm about documenting the event as it happens, and then usually I just kind of leave. So it's harder for me to sort of compare that. But yeah, I definitely think that we in the United States, that we could learn from other countries. One area where we really excel, though, I think the place where we're just the gold standard is our National Hurricane Center. I believe we have the best hurricane or cyclone warning center of across the entire world. I think we have the best technology. We fly planes into the hurricanes. No other country does that regularly. We're the only ones who just as a regular course of action fly planes into the hurricanes to get data. Every other country, even other rich first world countries, don't do that. Japan and Australia don't do that, or at least not regularly. Everything's based on satellite estimates until the hurricane is passing over buoys or land masses. So I want to, give the United States a real pat on the back of just our work in terms of like documenting and research, and the warnings I think are second to none.
Cool. Yeah.
Angela, how about you? Have a question for Josh?
So I know you mentioned that you just pretty much like to go in and see the action, but do you ever go back like a year later or just happen to go back and look? And then, will there be any documentation of this in the series?
Yeah, 100%. So probably the most cataclysmic human impact that I witnessed and experienced was Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. It was a category 5, and it made a direct hit on a pretty big city called Tacloban City. That's where I was. Storm surge, basically the whole city went underwater, thousands of deaths. At the height of the storm, I jumped in the water to rescue people. I was carrying children out of the water. So that was different. That went beyond the weather nerdery thing to that was like a hardcore human, I don't go to document the human impact, but that storm was all about the human impact, just like I said, carrying these children and old people out of the water and then coming out of the hotel afterward and seeing, dead bodies in the streets. I mean, that really, seeing injured children afterward. I mean, it was like, that one really rattled me. And I kind of got back to LA, and I was in like a real headspace for a while. I was like crying a lot and stuff like that. And it affected me. I didn't want to chase for a while. But the way I kind of worked through it was I went back a couple of times. I went back 3 months later to kind of do some research about the impacts and just to see the place coming back. And then I went back a year later, and it was great to document it and see what was happening, and just to reconnect with people that I'd survived the storm with or rescued. And it was like a really healing experience. And it was also good to just let the rest of the world see how the place was recovering. And in fact, that typhoon, I can't believe it, the 10th anniversary is this year. And my good friend James Reynolds, who's a great typhoon chaser, I went through that storm with him. He and I are thinking of going back for the 10-year anniversary because it was just such a big life-changing moment.
And Lois, who's watching, has a kind of a similar question based on your series. Now that you're doing these, Josh, are you potentially going to stick around a little bit longer to document more post-storm?
Absolutely. I think a lot of folks, I noticed that there's a real desire to see that. I used to just really leave right away because I wasn't into like gawking at the damage, and I'm all about the hurricane as it's happening. That still is the most motivating thing for me, is just literally seeing it unfold in front of me, you know. But more and more, the damage, I think, is important to document because it really sort of it shows how strong the storm was. And two, the stories of what other people went through, that is such a part of it. And even as a hardcore weather nerd, I'm like, that is important to capture that and to tell about it. And most importantly, TV viewers want to see that. They want to understand the human impact.
So, Josh, do us a favor, I guess. Tell our viewers, listeners, how they can find the Mission Hurricane series. I know it premieres this Sunday. Where's the best location?
So it's on the channel Weather Spy. So if you have a connected TV like Apple TV or Roku or whatever else, Weather Spy is a channel there. So you can watch it 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. That's when each episode premieres. Once it premieres, then you could watch that episode anytime you want on demand. Now, if you don't have a connected TV, or let's say you're in another part of the world, you can also watch the show on the app. So there's a mobile app for Weather Spy, and you can put it on your phone, your tablet, whatever, and you could just watch the show right in the app. And that doesn't matter whether you're in the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Malaysia, Philippines, whatever. The show is available to everyone across the globe at the same time, which I'm excited about because Hurricane Man, my last show, that was a very controlled release. First, it was only in the United Kingdom, and then 6 months later, Americans can see it. And then it took a little while longer for folks in Mexico and Latin America to see it. It was a very sort of controlled rollout. This is not that. Everybody could see it.
Cool. And it's coming out weekly, right? So new episode every week?
Exactly.
Awesome. And how can people follow you? Where can they find you?
So follow me on Twitter or Facebook at iCyclone, just the letter I and the word cyclone, iCyclone, or on Instagram, iCyclone1, because some kid took iCyclone and won't give it back to me. So
I think I found that the other day. So
I keep writing to him. He won't answer.
He won't. Yeah. It's been dormant for a while, but hey, thanks for joining us this evening for this bonus episode of Stormfront Freaks podcast. If you like having access to this live content, make sure you give this episode a like and also subscribe to our YouTube channel and listen to our normal bi-weekly show with guests from the weather and storm chasing industry, fun segments, and we do lots more, as Josh was referring to earlier. So I'm going to signal the all clear, and we'll catch you all next time on the Stormfront Freaks podcast.